he told her. He was stuck in a board meeting that could not wait. He said it in the calm, measured tone she had spent 12 years learning to trust. The tone that made clients sign without reading the fine print and made his wife believe every excuse he had ever handed her. He said it while standing 40 feet below her, on the atrium floor of the very gallery she had just entered, his hand resting at the small of another woman's back. Both of them laughing at something the curator had said. Vivienne Holloway was standing on the mezzanine level of the Caldwell Gallery in downtown Vancouver, holding a glass of sparkling water she had not yet touched, wearing the gray wool coat he always said made her look like a professor. When she looked down through the open railing and saw her husband, she saw his navy blazer. She saw the woman beside him, dark-haired, early 30s, wearing a silk blouse, the color of a winter sunrise. She saw the way he leaned down when the woman spoke, tilting his whole body toward her, the way a sunflower tilts toward heat. She saw his mother, standing 3 steps behind them, wearing her good pearls, holding a champagne flute and smiling at the art on the walls, with the comfortable ease of a woman who had been invited. The entire Holloway family was at this opening, every one of them, owner, except the woman who had spent 12 years managing their schedules, softening their edges, funding their comfort, and making herself smaller so the people around her would feel larger. That woman was Vivienne Holloway, and Vivienne Holloway was not the woman any of them believed her to be. Her grandfather, Edwin Ashworth, had built Ashworth Pharmaceuticals from a single dispensary in Winnipeg into one of the largest privately held pharmaceutical distribution companies in the country. Mother had taken it further, expanding into medical supply logistics across 4 provinces. By the time Vivienne turned 21, the family trust was worth north of $380 million, and the quarterly distributions alone were enough to fund a comfortable life several times over without touching the principal. Nobody knew this. That had been her choice. Vivienne had watched wealth perform its particular cruelty on every relationship she had ever observed. Mother's second marriage ended when her stepfather discovered the scale of the estate and began treating it as a retirement plan he had already been promised. Her university roommate had stopped calling after the summer. Vivienne paid for a cottage rental and noticed how the dynamic between them shifted overnight. A subtle repositioning, a new kind of attention that had nothing to do with friendship. Rafe, her first serious boyfriend, had proposed 6 weeks after meeting her father at a charity gala, and she had understood, with a clarity that surprised her, exactly what he had seen at that table. So at 25, Vivienne made a decision that she would revisit every year for the rest of her life. She would live quietly. She would take a real job, drive a reasonable car, rent a modest apartment. But she would find someone who loved her as the woman she actually was, not the balance sheet she was sitting on. She wanted to test it. She wanted to know whether love could exist without the gravity of money, warping everything around it. She took a position as a project coordinator at an urban planning firm in Vancouver. Steady salary, nothing that turned heads. Boom. She kept the trust to herself, reviewed the quarterly reports at her kitchen table like homework, and filed her own taxes using software that cost $39. She met Colin Holloway at a friend's dinner party when she was 27. He was an architect, already mid-career, with a reputation in sustainable residential design and the easy confidence of a man accustomed to being the most interesting person in whatever room he occupied. He talked about his work with the fluency of someone who had never found a more compelling subject. Vivienne sat across from him and watched the way she always watched, separating the genuine from the performed. He was charming. He was articulate. He was exactly the kind of man who knew he was charming and articulate and enjoyed the knowing. But near the end of the evening, when the host's elderly father grew confused and couldn't find his coat, Colin was the one who quietly helped him search without making a moment of it. He didn't announce the gesture. He just did it and came back to the table and resumed the conversation. That was what got her, not the portfolio, not the jaw, the small, unwitnessed kindness. Because in her experience, people performed their best selves when someone important was watching. Moments when no one was watching told the truth. They dated for 14 months. Vivienne paid attention to everything. The way he spoke about women who weren't in the room, how he handled being wrong, what he said about people who had less than he did. He passed enough of it. Not perfectly, but genuinely enough that she let herself believe the test had returned a real result. They married when she was 29. Vivienne organized the entire wedding. Colin chose the venue from a shortlist she had already narrowed, approved the menu she had already designed, and showed up looking handsome in a suit she had quietly arranged to be tailored because he had procrastinated. She noted this. She chose not to examine it closely. The years that followed had the architecture of a life that looked correct from the outside and revealed its load-bearing problems only to the person living inside it. Vivienne managed everything. Colin managed his career and his reputation. And very little else. She paid the mortgage from her project coordinator salary, which was real money but not enough money, and she supplemented it without discussion through a personal account funded by a fraction of her trust income. A private correction she made every month to keep things running without explanation. She handled the insurance renewals, the property tax filings, the condo maintenance fees, and the names of Colin's clients' spouses. She sent congratulations when his colleagues won awards and condolences when their parents passed. She tracked his professional development hours. She coordinated the dinner parties that built his network and cleared away the dishes long after he had moved to the couch. She ran the social infrastructure of his career while he drew the blueprints and accepted the credit. Colin never once asked how any of it moved. He threw their shared life the way a person moves through a well-maintained building, appreciating the function without considering the maintenance. When their daughter Isla arrived in year 5, Vivienne took 4 months and returned to work with the baby in daycare and the household running exactly as it had before, because she had built systems that didn't require her presence to function, only her ongoing invisible management. When she raised this once, not angrily, carefully. Colin looked at her with the expression she had catalogued years before. The look of a man to whom a problem has been handed that he has no interest in solving. "You make it look so easy, Viv. I don't know how you do it," he said it warmly. He meant it as a compliment. She understood that it was neither. Colin's mother, Sandra Holloway, was the kind of woman who delivered criticism so smoothly wrapped in warmth that you didn't feel the sting until you were alone and replaying the conversation. She visited often. She commented on Vivienne's cooking in a way that was technically praise and tonally something else. She referred to the condo as Colin's place, in small, unremarkable ways that accumulated over 12 years into a pattern Vivienne could have graphed. She organized family events. Christmas at the Island Cottage, long weekends in Kelowna, a 60th birthday celebration in Montreal, and mentioned them to Vivienne after the plans were already set, with the particular casualness of a woman who had decided, long ago, that her son's wife was a detail rather than a participant. Colin's younger sister, Brenna, reinforced the structure with a cheerfulness that was almost convincing. Vivienne. She called Vivienne efficient, the way you'd compliment an appliance. Vivienne so organized, she'd announced to the room, rolling her luggage through the front door and leaving it in the hallway for Vivienne to eventually move. "I honestly don't know how she keeps it all together." Vivienne knew exactly how. She kept it together by keeping it together, every day, without acknowledgement, while 3 adults accepted the result and called it her personality. She brought it up to Colin once. She told him quietly, using specific examples, that she felt like an afterthought in his family's planning. He said, "Babe, they don't mean anything by it, that's just how they are." She didn't raise it again. She added it to the weight she was already carrying, and carried it more carefully, so no one would notice. The weight grew heavier, the woman carrying it grew quieter. The quietness was read as contentment. It was not contentment, it was arithmetic. Vivienne had been in Toronto for 9 days. A professional development series hosted by her firm's national office, workshops, site visits, a set of evening sessions on sustainable infrastructure planning that she had genuinely wanted to attend. She called Colin each evening. He answered most nights. He sounded normal. He mentioned Isla. He said his mother had come to help with after-school pickup. He said everything was fine. On the last evening, she confirmed her return. "Home by 7 tomorrow," she told him. "I'll pick up something for dinner on the way from the airport." He said that sounded great. Her flight landed 20 minutes early. She texted Colin from the gate. No reply. She called from baggage claim. Voicemail. She called again outside arrivals. He picked up on the fourth ring. Hey, so sorry. We got pulled into an emergency session with the Granville Street client, and I can't break away. Take a cab and I'll make it up to you tonight, I promise. His voice was smooth and practiced, not the voice of a man under genuine professional pressure. The voice of a man reading from a script he had prepared. She said, okay. She hung up. She had planned to go straight to the cab line. Instead, she remembered the Ashworth Gallery opening. She had received an invitation to months earlier. The Caldwell Gallery on Granville, a private collection launch she had flagged in her calendar as optional. Her family foundation had been in quiet discussions with the gallery's philanthropic arm about an endowment. She was already on the street. The gallery was 8 minutes away. She decided to stop in, sign the guest book, show her face for 20 minutes. She walked in at 7:43 and took a glass of water from a passing tray and climbed the stairs to the mezzanine because she preferred to see a room from above before entering it. It was a habit her father had taught her, always find the high ground first. She looked down through the open railing and found her husband. She stood at that railing for 4 minutes. She watched Colin rest his hand on the woman's back. She watched Sandra Holloway accept a champagne refill from a server with the ease of a regular guest. She watched Brenna take a photograph of a large canvas and show it to the woman beside Colin. The three of them laughing together with the comfortable familiarity of people who had been doing this for some time. She watched Colin lean down and kiss the woman at the temple, a small domestic gesture. The kind you make without thinking. Because it has become reflex. Something moved through Vivienne in that moment that was not grief and not rage. It was older than brave. It was the particular stillness that arrives when a woman who has been performing smallness remembers the actual dimensions of herself. She did not take a photograph. She did not go downstairs. She walked back to the staircase and down and out through the side entrance onto the street, where the October air was cold and sharp and smelled like rain on concrete. She stood on the sidewalk and breathed for 30 seconds. Then, she opened her phone and called a number she had not dialed in over a year. Theodore, she said, it's Vivienne Ashworth. I need to reactivate the discretionary authority on the operating trust, and I need a meeting with the acquisitions team before the end of the week. Theodore Marsh had been the senior counsel of the Ashworth Family Trust for 19 years. He asked no questions. He never did. Of course, Vivienne, he said. We'll be ready. Colin came home 4 days later. He looked rested. He smelled faintly of a sunscreen brand they did not own. He walked into the kitchen at 7 in the evening carrying a duty-free bag he set on the counter without its explanation, and opened the refrigerator like a man returning from nothing more complicated than a long day. Vivienne was sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of tea and a folder. Isla was asleep. The condo was quiet. There you are, he said. Here I am, she agreed. How was Toronto? Informative. How was the Granville Street session? He took a bottle of sparkling water from the fridge. Brutal. Long week. The client kept changing the scope. He leaned against the counter. I'm exhausted. Which days were the scope changes? You usually log those in the project file. A pause. Brief, but a beat too long for a man with nothing to hide. I don't remember exactly. Thursday, maybe. It ran into Friday. He took a drink. Why? Vivienne opened the folder. Phone. She placed on the table a photograph she had not taken herself but had obtained through channels available to a woman with access to a $380 million trust and a law firm that billed $400 an hour. It was a photograph from the Caldwell Gallery's official Instagram account, posted the evening she had arrived, a candid of guests at the opening. Colin Holloway stood in the center of the frame in his navy blazer, his arm around a woman in a silk blouse, the color of a winter sunrise. Sandra Holloway stood 2 feet to his left, champagne in hand, smiling. Brenna was half in frame, mid-law. Vivienne turned the photograph to face him. She said, I was on the mezzanine. I watched you from above for 4 minutes. I watched you check in with the curator. I watched your mother accept a second glass of champagne. I watched Brenna photograph the canvas by the east wall. I watched you kiss her at the temple the way people do when it's already become habit. Colin looked at the photograph. His expression completed a short, unhappy journey from confusion to recognition to fear. It was not the first document in the folder. She placed the next one beside it. A hotel record from a boutique property in Whistler, on a weekend in February, when Colin had claimed a site visit for a residential project in Squamish. Restaurant receipt for two at a place in Gastown she had never been to. Charged to a credit card she had not known he held. A second hotel record, this one in Ottawa. 4 months ago on a weekend he had told her was a conference. She laid them out one at a time. She did not rush. Colin set the water bottle on the counter. His hands were not steady. This has been going on for at least 14 months, she said. The financial record is very clear. You are not a careful man, Colin. Well, you have simply been living with a woman careful enough to have noticed. He said her name. He said he could explain. She let him say both things. She said, you cannot explain. 14 months. That is not a mistake. That is a decision you made, and kept making, every week, for over a year. She closed the folder. She placed her hands flat on the table. Well, she looked at him. And for the first time in 12 years, she let him see her without the management. Without the careful tone and the organized patience and the steadiness she had worn like a garment every day since they met. She let him see the woman who had been running the arithmetic since the moment she stepped back from that mezzanine railing. I want a divorce, she said. The paperwork will be filed on Monday. You're welcome to stay in the guest room until the process begins. After that, you'll need to make other arrangements. Viv, we have Isla. We can work through this. We have Isla. That is the only reason this conversation is happening at this table. She stood. She picked up the folder. I'll end it, he said. Tonight. I'll call her right now. She stopped in the doorway. She did not turn around immediately. There's something you should know, she said, before you start calculating your next move. She turned just enough, before you start thinking about the condo, and the equity, and what you'll tell your firm, and how you'll position this. You should know that the woman you've been dismissing as efficient for 12 years is not who you think she is. She has never been who you think she is. She walked down the hall. She closed the bedroom door. She sat on the edge of the bed and breathed with her eyes shut for 30 seconds. Then she opened her laptop and sent 4 emails. One to Theodore, one to her personal archive, one to the Ashworth Foundation's director, and one to a commercial real estate acquisitions contact she had not used in 3 years. The next morning, she called her firm and resigned with appropriate notice. Then she walked into the office of the Ashworth Foundation for the first time as its acting executive director, a role that had been waiting for her signature for 6 years, and she signed the papers. The divorce filing arrived at Colin's lawyer's office 10 days later. It was the surface. Under the surface, Vivienne was doing what Ashworths do. She was restructuring. The condo had a mortgage in both their names, but the down payment had come from a personal account Vivienne held separately, funded by a fraction of her annual trust income. She had documentation going back to the week of closing. Her legal team filed a motion establishing her disproportionate financial contribution to the property. Colin's lawyer called it aggressive. Vivienne's lawyer called it accurate. The second move was quieter, through the Ashworth Foundation, which she had kept dormant throughout her marriage. Waiting, she understood now, for exactly this. She formalized a significant endowment commitment to the Vancouver Children's Arts Consortium, an organization whose board Colin had been quietly pursuing for the visibility it would give his firm. The endowment came with a naming condition for their new design studio. The Ashworth Creative Studio, her family's name, in the building. His firm had just been shortlisted to redesign. The consortium announced it at a press breakfast. Design industry media covered it. Colin received the news on his phone while sitting in an early morning meeting with his partners, and felt the particular vertigo of a man discovering that the ground he had been building on belongs to someone else. His colleagues began asking questions. Ashworth, like the pharmaceutical trust? Is that your wife's family? He had no answers. He had been married to the heir of a significant private estate for 12 years and had never once been curious enough to ask a meaningful question about her family's finances because he had been too comfortable inside the life she quietly built around him to wonder who had built it. The third move was the one that mattered most. Colin's firm had spent 2 years pursuing a landmark mixed-use redevelopment project in the False Creek area. The project had stalled on a single parcel, a commercial lot held by a private holding company that had been consistently unresponsive to outreach from his partners. The lot was not for sale, but it was not off the table either. It simply did not respond. Months of unanswered emails. Phone calls that went to a voicemail that was never returned. Colin's partners had begun to fracture over the delay. The holding company was registered federally. The holding company was owned by a numbered trust. The trust was managed by Theodore Marsh. The property belonged to Vivienne. She did not sell. She did not explicitly block. She let it sit, the way you let something sit when you are in no hurry at all, because you have finally stopped performing urgency for other people's benefit. Later, she reviewed Colin's firm's proposals at her kitchen table in the mornings with her coffee. In the apartment she had purchased outright through the trust, the week she filed for divorce. A 3-bedroom unit in Kitsilano with a west-facing balcony and a view of the mountains she had looked at her whole life and never allowed herself to simply enjoy. She never told him the parcel was hers. She didn't need to. The point was not cruelty. The point was proportion. Her slender. For 12 years Colin had treated her competence as a convenience and her presence as a given. Now her absence was an obstacle he could not dismantle, and her name was on the wall of the consortium. Building his firm needed to impress. The collapse of the household, once she left it, was swift and a little predictable. The internet went down because the account was in her name. The condo fees were debited from a joint account she had already transferred her portion out of, legally and with proper notice. The cleaner stopped coming because Vivienne had arranged and paid for the service and simply didn't rearrange it. The calendar reminders for Isla's appointments, the school communications, the daycare billing. All of it lived in systems Vivienne had built, and Colin had never looked at closely enough to replicate. He called her 6 times in the first 3 weeks asking for passwords, provider names, the login for the condo portal. She answered each question once, clearly, without warmth or coldness, the way you read instructions to someone assembling something for the first time. Then she redirected everything else to the family lawyer. Sandra arrived to help. She stayed for 10 days. In those 10 days, she discovered the full architecture of what Vivienne had been quietly maintaining for a decade. The subscriptions, the automated payments, the school schedules, the recurring appointments, the address list for Christmas cards, the document folder with warranties and service records for every appliance in the condo. Brenna. She called Brenna from Colin's kitchen one evening in a voice Brenna later described as uncharacteristically subdued. She was running everything, Brenna. I mean all of it. I didn't understand the scope. You thought she was just organized, Brenna said. I thought she was a bit much, Sandra said, quietly. I was wrong. She was the only competent adult in this situation, and I spent 12 years treating her like a support function. It was the most honest thing Sandra Holloway had ever said about Vivienne. It was said too late, to the wrong person, in a kitchen that was no longer Vivienne's problem to maintain. But it was said, woman. Vivienne never used her name. Didn't need to. Lasted 3 months in the life Vivienne had vacated. She had fallen for Colin Holloway, which was understandable. Colin Holloway was appealing. He was well-dressed and confident, and knew the right things to say, in rooms full of people who were impressed by the right things. But the Colin she had known existed inside a structure. Vivienne had built around him, and the structure was gone now. And what remained was a man who forgot to renew the parking permit, burned the edges off everything he cooked, and responded to Isla's school emails 3 days late when he responded at all. She had not fallen in love with a man. She had fallen in love with the curated version of a man that another woman had spent 12 years carefully maintaining. She left on a rainy Tuesday. She took her things. She did not leave a note. Vivienne's new apartment had a balcony lined with rosemary in terracotta pots that she had bought herself, one by one, the way you furnish a life, when you are finally building it for yourself, and not around someone else. Isla had chosen the bedroom with the window seat that looked out over the neighbor's cedar hedge. The kitchen was small and bright, and Vivienne cooked in it, without planning menus, around someone else's preferences, and found, to her quiet surprise, that she was a better cook than she had realized. She had been cooking for an audience for so long she had forgotten she actually enjoyed it. She stepped into the role she had been circling for years. As executive director of the Ashworth Foundation, oversaw a portfolio of grants in education, women's housing, and early childhood programming. She built an operating team. She hired people who were better at specific things than she was, and told them so directly, and watched the organization expand in ways that surprised even Theodore. A national magazine profiled the foundation 8 months after she took the helm. The piece ran 4 pages. It mentioned her divorce in 1 paragraph and spent the rest of the piece on the word "evil." The photograph showed her on her balcony with the mountains behind her, in a charcoal blazer she had bought without asking anyone's opinion. Her posture easy, her expression the particular kind of calm that belongs to a woman who has stopped managing other people's comfort. Colin read the profile. He saw the foundation's operating budget. He looked up the Ashworth Trust's registered assets and sat very still for several minutes. Then he called her. It was a Sunday evening in late November. Vivienne was on the balcony with a cup of tea and a novel she had been meaning to read for 2 years. She let the phone ring 3 times before she answered. He said her name. He said he needed to talk to her. Not through the lawyers, in person. She said, "There's nothing that requires an in-person meeting that isn't already being handled," he said. "I know about the trust. I looked up your family. I didn't know any of it." She looked at the mountains. She said, "You know now, eh? You didn't know for 12 years because you never asked. You never asked about my family or my background, or why a project coordinator never seemed to worry about money, the way project coordinators worry about money. You didn't ask because you weren't curious about me. You were comfortable. There's a difference." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "My mother wants to reach out. She wants to apologize." "Your mother wants to renegotiate," Vivienne said. "That's not the same thing." "Well, she made her position clear for 12 years. I don't require an apology. I require nothing from her. Brenna wanted to know if you'd be open to connecting her with the foundation. She's been talking about starting something in the arts space." Vivienne was quiet for exactly 4 seconds. "Brenna can find the foundation's grant inquiry form on our website," she said. "She's welcome to submit an application through the standard process. We review everything on the same timeline." "Viv, I'm losing the False Creek project. My partners are pulling out. I can't get the parcel and no one will tell me why the holding company won't respond." She set her tea down. She let the silence extend for 5 full seconds. "The holding company won't respond," she said, "because the holding company is me." She heard him stop breathing for a moment. "That parcel has been in my family's portfolio for 9 years. You have spent the better part of 2 years trying to acquire a piece of land from your own wife. You had breakfast with her twice a week in the kitchen of the apartment she was paying half the mortgage on, and you never once asked a meaningful question about her family's holdings, because it never occurred to you that she had any." She paused. "I'm not going to sell that parcel to your firm. I'm also not going to hold it against you indefinitely. When the trust decides to move it, it will go to the most qualified buyer under standard market terms. If your group restructures and meets those terms, you're welcome to bid. But you won't receive special consideration. You won't receive a discount, and I won't be returning your personal calls about it." Colin said her name again, softer this time, the version of her name he used when he wanted something. She said, "You told your mother I was efficient. You told your colleagues I was organized. You told yourself I was a bit controlling when I was actually the only person keeping the whole arrangement functional. You treated me like the floor you walked on, and never once looked down to see who was holding you up." Her voice stayed level. It had the particular steadiness of a woman who has spent 12 years moderating her tone in other people's interests and is now using that skill entirely for herself. "I hid who I was because I wanted to be chosen for who I was. I found out I hadn't really been chosen at all. I had been used, very comfortably, by people who never looked closely enough to see me. That is the answer to every question you never thought to ask." She ended the call. She picked up her tea. She looked at the mountains in the dark, their outlines visible against a sky that still held the last gray light of the evening. Somewhere in the city below, in a condo that had once been her responsibility to maintain, a man was sitting with the specific weight of a reckoning he had not prepared for, in a life he had never actually built. In December, 8 weeks after the phone call, Vivienne sat on her balcony on a Thursday evening with a glass of wine she had opened, because she felt like it, and a cashmere blanket in a deep teal she had purchased. The week she signed the foundation papers, it cost more than she would have spent a year ago. She did not clip a coupon for it. She felt no particular guilt. She opened her phone. She went to a folder she had created the night of the gallery. Not photographs but documents, the hotel records, the restaurant, receipts, the gallery photograph, the credit card statements, the careful architecture of evidence she had assembled with the same precision she brought to everything she touched. She looked at it for a long time. The divorce was finalized. Custody was settled, shared and functional, because Isla deserved two parents who could be in the same room, and Vivienne had decided early to build a process that made that possible. The condo had been sold. The False Creek parcel was under a formal market review. The foundation had just announced its largest single grant in the organization's history, a partnership with 3 women's shelters across BC to fund transitional housing for mothers leaving unsafe situations. Isla was sleeping 15 feet away, in the bedroom with the window seat, surrounded by the drawings she had taped to the wall without asking permission, the way children do when they feel at home. Vivienne selected the folder. She pressed delete. She confirmed. The screen returned to her photo library. Recent pictures. Isla on the balcony in her rain boots, insisting on watering the rosemary in November. A selfie with her brother at the foundation gala, both of them caught mid-law. The brass lettering on the wall of the Ashworth Creative Studio. Her family's name, catching the light through the consortium's skylights on the afternoon of the dedication. She closed her phone. She pulled the blanket closer. She thought about the gallery. Not about Colin and the woman in the silk blouse. About the mezzanine. About the moment she stood above everything and looked down and understood, with absolute clarity, what she was looking at and what she was going to do about it. And instead of going downstairs and making a scene, instead of calling out across the atrium floor, or pressing herself against the railing, until the glass shook, she had walked calmly back to the staircase, out to the street, and called Theodore. She had activated the trust. She had stepped back into the life she had been holding at arm's length for 12 years. Not out of revenge, out of recognition. The recognition that the woman she had been performing was smaller than the woman she actually was, and that the performing had not protected her. It had only made her easy to overlook. She was not easy to overlook anymore. Her name was on a building. Foundation was shelter for women who had spent years making themselves small in rooms, safe. In rooms where they were not safe, her daughter was asleep inside a home Vivienne had chosen for herself, and the rosemary on the balcony railing had survived the first frost of the season, and was still growing, which felt like the most honest possible thing. She had tested love against anonymity, and discovered that the people around her had not loved her. They had relied on her. Those are two different things, and the difference matters. And the difference is the whole story. Some women discover who they are in the making. Some discover it in the breaking. Vivienne Holloway discovered it on a mezzanine in Vancouver, on an October evening, looking down at a life that had been arranged around her, without ever including her. She walked out of that gallery and back into herself, and she did not look behind her once. She had no reason to. Where she was going was better than anywhere she had been.